Well, welcome back. We are now in video number 10. And what we're going to do is use the ethical framework from video number 9, and we're going to apply it to the ethical issue of euthanasia. So I'm going to share my screen, and then I'll explain to you a scenario that took place that led up to this whole, to what we'll discuss and how we'll go about planning it. But a number of years back, there was a woman in California who had just gotten married, enjoyed her honeymoon. When she came back, she had some tests and she found out that she had a brain tumor. And then the doctors then walked with her through the process of what would happen as the brain tumor grew and what would be the physical manifestations of that and how she would actually die because it was terminal. Well, she knew that north of her, in the state of Oregon, where I'm from, they have the right to die law. And so she chose to move from California with her new husband up to Oregon in order to try to qualify for their euthanasia laws, which she did. And then she took her life 2 days after her husband's birthday. So with that as the backdrop, what I would like to do is have us think about, I mean, the euphemism that is used is dying with dignity, right? And so dying with dignity, that you get to control how you're going to die, and you're not going to let the cancer ravage you to where you are look like a different person. And I understand that. My mom died of cancer, and she went a tremendous transformation during that period of time. But the idea of dying with dignity, is that a Christian perspective on the issue? And then you want to ask yourselves, did she do the right thing? Should her family be proud of her? Because one of the things she said why she wanted to do it is she didn't want her family to suffer, nor did she want to go through the physical decline that would have taken place with the brain tumor. And so what I want us to do is, if I were using this as my test case, then what I would say is, okay, here's the project description. And so now we're going to flesh out the ethical framework we did in the previous video, and we will apply it to euthanasia. So here's the project description. Use the ethical framework to resolve 3 important ethical issues within your context. Clearly, since we have the right to die in Oregon, that law, that I want to choose that as one. And so the first thing you need to do is define the issue. Second, describe the current state of the issue. 3, give a brief history and of the attempts made to actually solve the problem and their outcomes. 4 is you want to apply an ethical framework to the issue. That is the previous video. And then you want to propose ethical solutions to the problem based on the application of your ethical framework to the ethical issue. Once you've done that, then you'll write up a SMART plan to execute it, and then finally you'll implement that. Okay, you only have to do that for one of them, and you may need to join forces with another group who actually is about doing that. So we'll leave that up to you. So let's go ahead and we're going to walk through that project description. We're going to go through the first 4 steps, and we'll finish with 5, but the 5th step is not actually in the learning experience. It's embedded in the actual framework. So let's go ahead and begin. So the first thing you want to do is you want to define the issue. And so we are defining the issue that I am going to study is euthanasia, or also called mercy killing. Okay, and it's the act of putting to death painlessly or allowing to die as withholding extreme medical measures of a person or an animal suffering from an incurable, especially painful disease or condition. So that's the dictionary definition, right? But it's mercy killing, right? The person's going to suffer, and therefore you don't want them to suffer. And again, these are euphemisms. If you frame the language like that, it would seem merciful and right to do. Okay. So then we want to actually describe. The second step is to describe the current state of the issue. And so you can see here that in Oregon, we have, it's called the Death with Dignity Act. All right. And on October 27th, 1997, Oregon enacted the Death with Dignity Act, which allows terminally ill Oregonians, or people from Oregon, to end their lives through voluntary self-administration of lethal medications expressly prescribed by a physician for that purpose. So if I cut through the euphemisms, what it is it's a doctor who gives you some medicines. You then take those medicines and commit suicide with those medicines, but it's the doctor who makes sure you get the right medicines and do it in the right way, so it will be painless for you until you realize you have to either stand before God as a judge in eternity separated from him, or as a loving father and are ushered into heaven. Okay, so that's step 2, is you want to describe the current state of the issue. And you can see there's questions like, when I went to the actual website where they have all the information in Oregon, here are some of the questions. Who can participate? And it gives you that information. How long must a patient live in Oregon, right? This woman, when she came, she had to live here a certain amount of time. And how does a patient demonstrate residency? So you just can't come in and do it willy-nilly or without any legal oversight. Okay, step 3, you want to give a history of the attempts to solve the problem. Now, this doesn't have to be local. This can be a more global one. And you can see on the left there is it begins to show you the history of how people have been trying to solve the problem of euthanasia or mercy killing. And then I've included links here where you can get more information on it. And the history is actually quite extensive and it's very good. You can see that I got one from the deathwithdignity.org. That is the government website. It's the actual official website where the law is. The second one I got was from a journal of ethics from the American Medical Association. The AMA is supposed to be the organization when you are a physician that you should be a part of. And so they have put out their own information on the history of euthanasia. Then once you have that all in place, that takes you to step 4. And this is really where the bulk of your work will be, because you want to then apply your ethical framework to that, okay? And so what we're going to do is I've put that ethical framework in these steps. So step 1, if you recall, was you need to select the issue, and we've already done that, right? So we selected euthanasia. Then you want to gather the facts, and we did that above. Okay, oops, excuse me. And then you can see that I've just filled in a lot of these questions. So for example, what types of euthanasia exist? Who gets to choose who dies? Another question is, under what circumstances can a person select euthanasia in Oregon? And you can see that you have to be an adult, meaning you're 18 years or older. You need to be an actual resident of the state of Oregon, which is actually quite easy. You need to be able to communicate. You have to be able to tell people that it's your decision, so no, somebody's not going to actually use that to kill you. And then you have to have been diagnosed with a terminal disease that will end your life within 6 months, but you just never know. My father-in-law has cancer, and he was supposed to have died actually probably last year, and he is still alive, and he's still very productive in ministry. And so you just don't know. Another question is, doesn't making it legal make it moral? And clearly, just because something is legal, it doesn't make it moral. Question about how about the slippery slope argument, right? That if you start with this, then the next thing you're going to do is this, and before you know it, the government will actually be the one, not you, who selects who gets to live and die. If you are born maybe with a certain type of disease, and the government says, you know what, the prognosis of that is not good, then they get to make that selection. So that's the slippery slope argument. Okay, the next thing is step 3 is to determine the ethical issues. Okay, this is the SIF part. So this is where you have to really begin to think through this and say, okay, let's think through all the ethical issues that are involved with this. So euthanasia raises a number of agonizing moral dilemmas, right? So first, is it ever right to end the life of a terminally ill patient who is undergoing severe pain and suffering? So what would happen if you could actually manage their pain? Would that then constitute and allow them to say, you know what, I still want to take my life? Or 2, under what circumstances is euthanasia justifiable, if at all, if ever? And so you have to think through that. Is, how about if you are pregnant and you have a terminal disease and you're 3 months pregnant and you're going to die within, they say, a month? Can you commit euthanasia? And if you do, then you're also need to think through the issues of the fetus. All right. Or number three, is there a moral difference between killing someone and letting them die? And we'll see later that that is a very significant issue as we're trying to think through this. So the part of the determine the ethical issues in sifting would include those kind of elements. So then what you want to do is you want to look at the actual options. When you think of euthanasia, there are actually different types of euthanasia. There is active euthanasia that you can see there. And then there is natural passive euthanasia. And then there's unnatural passive euthanasia. And we'll look at that at the end. So you'll want to make sure you have great clarity on what types there are and what the Bible would allow and what it would not allow. Okay. And then another thing we want to do is there's this thing called the double effect principle. And I'll let you read more on that. But sometimes when you do one thing, it creates a problem with another thing. And so that it might be permissible to do this, but the actual result of doing this creates even a greater problem that maybe you hadn't anticipated. And so you want to think through these elements, okay? And so that's all under this category of determining the ethical issue, or what we're calling sifting. You're trying to figure out what are the actual issues. Then we want to then begin to apply the Bible. And again, this could be quite robust, depending on how much time you spend here. So when I applied the Bible and I was looking at some theological considerations, one area is in the area of anthropology. So I want to understand the nature of man. So man is made in the image of God. Discuss that. Our life is not our own. The Bible is very clear on that. Euthanasia violates the sixth commandment. Thou shalt not murder. Okay, it's self-murder is murder. 4, only God has the right to take life. The scriptures are very clear that God is both the author of life and the taker of life, and that we are not to do that. Then 5, it is not merciful to kill a sufferer, meaning that just because a person suffers, to kill them actually is a very unmerciful act. And especially if the person doesn't know Christ, because what you're doing is you're condemning that person for an eternity separated from God. Number 6, suffering offers deeper lessons of life that cannot be learned any other way. And so God is always in the process. Remember, we said that the purpose of ethics is evangelistic. And so one of the things is when we apply that ethic and we move through, I remember my brother-in-law and his wife had I forget which child it was, and he had a heart condition and he had other issues. And every time they would go to the doctor would always say, you need to abort this child. You need to abort this child. You need to abort this child. They didn't abort the child because they're Christians. And so what they did is the baby was born and his name was Happy. He lived for approximately 10 days and then he died. Now they would never have those 10 days were a very precious gift to them, but the suffering that they had to go through was part of what's made them who they are today. And so suffering offers deeper lessons, both for the person suffering and for those who have to come alongside and help them during that time. And finally, number 7 is there's no price tag on human life. And so these are all biblical pieces of information and data that you want to have included in the conversation. And then what we do is say, okay, and again, this is where some of you may disagree with me, and that's okay. But I would then say, okay, we have graded absolutism, meaning that there's multiple things that God commands, and they seem to be in conflict. For some of you, you will not choose graded absolutism, and that's okay. And so you'll use the non-conflicting absolutism where there's no conflict because God will work something out. I am not taking that, but if that's where you're going to go, then you need to insert that here. But in this step with graded absolutism, we are looking at one issue is the scriptures are very clear, you shall not murder. Another one is that we're to show mercy for those who suffer, okay? And another one is that we're to be wise stewards. And finally, we're to obey the word of God over the wisdom of man. And so when we look at that, we have to say, okay, what is the highest value here? Is it the person's comfort? Is it the family's comfort? Is it the person's choice and decision? Or is it that life is precious and we never are the ones who get to take that life from another human being, or we don't get to take our own life. And so that's where we apply graded absolutism. And then what we do is we have to list the options. Okay, step 6 is we list the options. I have 5 options that are listed there. And so it can be let the person die naturally, right? You just remove all unnatural means and you just let them die. 2 is you let a qualified person end their lives. 3 is you use any means available to fight death until death, because death is our enemy, right? Now that can be very costly. Whereas the first one, you just let the person die. They are maybe at home and they can die that way, in a natural manner. Number 4 is you let the doctors make the final call. And number 5 is follow the laws of your country, Romans 13. And therefore, since it's permissible in Oregon, then it would be permissible for you as a Christian. Now, obviously, all of those options are not good options. And so you have to list those options, though, to be able to begin to actually determine what is the best option of those. Okay, then you're going to actually compare the options. And so that's what I do. And then you can see here, and you can see this in the learning experience. And it begins to go through each one of those and both the pros and the cons and the things that you need to think through. And then finally, you got to consider the consequences. This is more the synthesized idea. And when we're thinking through the consequences, you need to look at each of the options and say, okay, if we do this, what are the consequences? If we do this, what are the consequences? If we do this, what are the consequences? And then finally, the last thing that all of us have to do is you have to make a decision. Okay, and that decision has to be by faith. Again, we said that it can't be just a pragmatic decision by itself. Pragmatism without faith very often leads to disobedience. So pragmatism plus faith in the Word of God then will lead to a faith-filled decision for that person. All right, and that's the process, and that's what you're going to want to do. This is really the heart of the project, as we said, and you'll want to really think through, okay, what are the ethical issues I want to do? And then go through this process. My encouragement is this is because there are going to be shared ethical issues. Some of you may choose abortion or euthanasia or I don't know what are the other issues you might choose. If there's other people within your cohort that are doing that, by all means, work with them to do that. And then, but I would want you to try to select one that's unique to your situation that you can work through. That maybe is not one of these mainline moral or ethical issues, but you do want to make sure it actually fulfills the qualifications of a moral dilemma or a moral issue. So this is it for this video. In the next video, I'm going to just try to wrap things up and make sure that we're clear on everything. So I hope this has been helpful. And again, this is simply an application to the previous video, and hopefully as you do this, you'll really rejoice in who God is and in his wisdom. So thanks.